Good afternoon and good morning to some of you, and welcome to today's results at the community level first learning community group meeting. This is being facilitated as well as a part of the Partnership's national webinar series. I am Tiffany Marley, and I serve as the project director for the Learning Communities Resource Center. And on behalf of the entire partnership team, we welcome you to today's session. With that said, want to congratulate all of you who applied and have been accepted to be a part of this group, which means that you will follow an entire series of conversations and presentations related to what we call results at the community level. We feel that it is important in that as a network, as we think about addressing both the causes and the conditions of poverty, we can't do so effectively without really deeply understanding what it means to do community level work. And so we have been really, I would say, blessed to have a series of subject matter experts, one who will be introduced later today, Dr. Barbara Mooney, but there will be several experts that will engage us in conversation related to this topic. And so as we begin today's presentation, would like to also invite us to just take a moment to reflect on, to look at the promise of community action, in that it truly grounds who we are and this work that we engage in on a daily basis for families and individuals in our community. And it says, community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Courtney Kohler, who is the Senior Program Associate on our team, who will say a little bit more about today's session. Courtney?
All right, well, thank you, Tiffany. Appreciate that introduction and talking a little bit about this learning community that we are kicking off today. So this is one of our first open learning community groups that we're launching this year, and we're really focusing in on these community level needs, outcomes, and strategies within this learning community. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about that today as we start thinking about community level work. So just a few housekeeping items as we get started. Again, I'm Courtney Kohler. I'm a Senior Associate at the Community Action Partnership. I'll be kind of running some of the behind the scenes as well as introducing our subject matter expert today. And we also have Hyacinth McKinley on the line, who's running some of the behind the scenes and looking at your questions as you send those in. So just a few quick technical notes to get you prepared. This webinar will be recorded. So it'll be made available to everyone afterwards or for others who weren't able to attend today. And we'll follow up via email as well as it'll be on the partnership website within the next 2 days or so. We also have a new online learning management system that the recording will be posted to, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the webinar. So everyone is muted at this point for the presentation so that you don't have to, you don't hear the background noise. But what we'll do as far as questions go, we'll have people submit those through the chat function. If you have a specific question for a presenter or the host, please send that. You can choose who you send your chat to. So you can choose presenter and host. And then if you want to send a message, we're gonna have some interactive questions throughout the webinar that we'd like for you to answer and share with your peers. And so during that time, in the chat box, you can select to send your chat to everyone. And that way everyone can kind of see the answers and engage in that discussion. You should be able to hear out of your computer speakers or your phone speakers, however you've connected. If you do lose audio at any point during the presentation, you can click the Communicate tab in the upper left-hand corner of your screen and select Audio Broadcast to reboot your audio. And then if you continue to have audio issues, please You can switch your audio over to the teleconference number if you're not already using that. And any technical questions that you have, you can send directly to the host or myself, Courtney Kohler, into the Q&A box. And then any content-related questions, those are the ones that are best sent through the chat box. All panelists is what you want to select for questions that might be answered towards the end on the content of today's webinar. Whenever we're going to ask those more interactive questions, please respond those to everyone in the webinar. All right, so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started today and run through our agenda. So we're going to talk through just a little bit of learning community information for those of you who might not be familiar with the learning community just yet. And then we're going to go through some different introductions of our learning community team as well as our subject matter expert. Then we're going to be talking about community level work, and so of course that's what this webinar is focused around today. Throughout that time there will be some of those questions that come up and just asking you to think about your community needs assessment as well as what your agency might already be doing around community level work or things that the agency has thought about implementing in the future. And then we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A session, so if you want to submit your questions throughout to the panelists, we will address those at the end for kind of the overall questions. And then we'll end with kind of wrapping up and a meeting schedule for future events. So as far as our learning community goes, really the purpose of this initiative through the partnership is to analyze community action outcomes and identify effective, promising, and innovative practice models that alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty. So it's all about sharing this information so that people can better address these causes and conditions in their communities. And so it's really about just building that capacity throughout the Community Action Network to be able to fight poverty. So here's a definition from Harvard Center on the Developing Child about learning communities. And we really kind of resonate with this as well. So learning communities provide a space and structure for people to align around a shared goal. Effective communities are both aspirational and practical. They connect people, organizations, and systems that are eager to learn and work across boundaries while holding members accountable to a common agenda, metrics, and outcomes. These communities enable participants to share results and learn from each other, thereby improving their ability to achieve rapid yet significant progress. And so holding that kind of definition in mind as we learn together throughout this webinar series. We also kind of hold tight to our National Community Action Network theory of change and our goals. One, of course, is focused on individual and families, and two are focused on communities. And so this kind of emphasizes the need for this learning community group within the network in the fact that two of our national goals are centered around the community level work and empowering people within the community. And so as you kind of see here, hopefully most of you have seen this, but even the core principles relate to this topic, such as the community level change that we seek out in community action. So to introduce who you'll be seeing throughout these webinars and who you'll be hearing from, on the screen here is our Learning Community Resource Center team at the Community Action Partnership. And so Dara Crocker is our Director of Training and Technical Assistance. So he kind of oversees all of our training and technical assistance initiatives, LCRC being one of those. Tiffany Marley, you heard from her earlier, she's our Project Director for the Learning Community. I myself is the Senior Associate. We also have Hyacinth McKinley, Liza Porras, and Charity Frankowski, who are on our team as well. So these are kind of the faces and the names that you'll see throughout these learning communities. Then our subject matter expert is Dr. Barbara Mooney. So many of you might already know her. And she's going to be facilitating the first part of this learning community, so kind of phase one of results at the community level, as well as she's also have been involved in some of our other learning communities too. So she's kind of one of our main subject matter experts across the whole learning community. And so we welcome her today and appreciate her being with us to talk about results at the community level and community needs, outcomes, and strategies. So Barbara, I'll go ahead and pass the presenter ball over to you. And I think you're on. Except I think you're muted. You want to unmute? There you go. Yep.
Am I now unmuted?
Right. Yes,
Good.
You're good now.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to start to talk about community level work, and we have been talking about this for quite a long time. This is not a new piece, but we're going to really try to define it better and try to talk about it in a way that will help us to be able to define it and then to standardize our language around community level work as we go forward. Let's see. The network really has works on two levels. They work on the level of the direct services to families, but also then to community conditions. So what do we really mean by community level work? Well, like everything else with the community action process, it starts with our assessing the needs of the community. That's always the foundational question. What was in the needs assessment? What did your needs assessment show? And were there causes and conditions of poverty that were unique to the community? And this is one of the pieces that's referred to in the organizational standards, 3.4, specifically identifying the findings on the causes of conditions of poverty and the needs. So when we think about these needs, we often identify them on family level or community level. Now, I know this is not new ground, and some of you may have heard these examples before, but you know, research shows us that you have to hear something 7 to 11 times before it really becomes integrated into your knowledge base. So, so at the individual or family level need, something that's specific to the individual or to a group of people. So families with low income need assistance in getting their children ready for school. That would be something that would be a family level need. Or vulnerable senior citizens can't care for their homes, can't accomplish some tasks like vacuuming or laundry. And then some working age adults don't have the skills to get jobs. These are all family level, individual level issues. But they can emerge into bigger issues, like there are no early childhood programs in a certain community. So those individuals who have a need in assisting to prepare their children don't have a place to go. There's a larger percent of the population is becoming senior citizens or vulnerable, and so that creates a community level issue, and so on. So you know that's what we're talking about here. So how do we address the causes that we've identified? There are different strategies if you're going to do direct services or if you're going to attack one of these bigger problems. If the agency is going to devote resources, then they have to make sure that it's part of a strategic process. Before this session, we asked you to think about these ideas. Was there a need that was identified by your needs assessment at this level? Was there, has your agency decided that they are going to work on something at the community level? So if you have ideas about that, things that you've already thought about or things you've already identified, put them in the chat window, and Courtney's going to be watching for that, and we'll get some feedback from you as we go forward, because it's important for us to think about how are we defining this community level need and the causes and conditions of poverty. This is how we're defining, and I might say just a little plug here, we have created a white paper that is the result of last year's learning community on the community level outcomes and activities, where we synthesized the information that was presented both by the subject matter experts that came in, that joined us, and by the participants that did projects and talked about the community level work they were doing. So we came up with these three elements that really need to be part of an initiative that is considered community level. And that first one is that there's a clearly identified need, that there's an expectation that something will change at the community level, that there's really something that can be realistically expected to change, and then the acknowledgement that the local agency cannot do this work alone, that they have to have strategies that include changes, that include people outside their own agency, customers, partners, other people. And what is a community change? Things like change to the environment, to physical structure. Sometimes we think of buildings or facilities, or it can mean systems changes or public policy. Are people chatting, putting anything in the chat that we want to look at?
Not seeing anything just yet.
So I just want to encourage people to put some things in the chat.
But we did just see one come through, actually.
Okay, good. All right.
Yeah. So we had one that said, you know, we're thinking about a program for middle schoolers in conjunction with public housing for after-school program that would be similar to Project Discovery, a leadership development, and a focus on academic achievement. Does this qualify?
So my answer would be to ask the question, what was the need that was identified? So what we do in community action a lot of times is we start to say, okay, I've seen a project that was positive and which developed some outcomes that I would like to replicate, and we have to go back then and do the work to find out, is there a need in our community, and if so, what's the need? So to start back with the need, and then really to look at some of these questions that are on this slide, how much change would be needed to address that need, and then how important is that change, and then that's two levels, how important is the change to the community, and how important is it to the agency, does it fit into the agency's mission? So those are the kinds of questions, Harriet, that I would ask back to you, and we can have that dialogue. Now we have 70 people on the call, so we can't do a dialogue today, but what we plan to do in the affinity group calls is to have that kind of dialogue where you would talk about some ideas that you have, we would pose some questions, you would think some more about it, and then we can go forward. Thanks for sharing that. That's a good idea. One of the things that happens is when we're thinking about the change, what will the change look like in the community? It's easy to see there's an emergency shelter that goes in, and there wasn't one before, and now there is, and over time we can make sure that that's still there, that they're still operating. So that's an easy one. But other things come up, like increasing awareness of a certain issue. And one of the strategies to increase awareness for something like the issues related to unemployment would be to host a community-wide job fair. Now that's a strategy, that's not an outcome, and people are thinking, how could they consider this job fair in terms of some outcomes? So, and this is in the white paper for further follow-up. Let's look at the green one here. What measures can be included? And of course, the reduction of unemployment is definitely one thing that we would want to have happen, but that's a long-term goal, and it would be very difficult for us to say that we reduced unemployment just because we had a job fair. But it feeds into the blue piece right above it that says, does this effort fit into a larger strategy? So what does the job fair do to help increase awareness about issues related to unemployment, and what other things come out of the job fair? So is there follow-up? And this would give you some family level outcomes. Did individual people get jobs? And if so, then that could help you identify the part that this strategy played in the overall strategy that would reduce unemployment. And then what could change? And in the gray box there are some ideas. Did any of the employers that came to the job fair change the way they were marketing their available job positions because of it? Did they never think to do outreach to a low-income population before? And then finally, what kind of awareness was increased? Did the job fair get some press that helped the public understand the scope of the unemployment issue in their community? Did we see more employers in a certain field represented at the job fair beyond what we had seen in the past? And did that indicate to us that there might be more opportunities or a trend for employment? So you can see by this little graphic that there is there are different ways to think about the outcomes. It's not just, we had a job fair and here's how many people came through the door. That's really not enough for us to devote resources to a project. It really should be part of a larger initiative, and there should be follow-up, and there should be some clear expectation of what's going to change. Anybody that has any questions about this one, please let us know, put in the chat. And I thought I saw something in the chat from Zandy that there's a better, there's some other things in there, so I'm not going to look in the chat right now. I'll let Courtney do that. There are different levels of results, of course. Now, this is absolutely nothing new, but it is a way for you to understand these terms are appropriate for community level work just as they are for family level work. So where do you want to be? What is it that we can do right now? These are big, or as you've heard the term, wicked problems. These are big problems, and the long-term results may take a while, but what can happen right away? And then what the converse to that is, if we do nothing, what will happen? What will the community do? So to be thinking of what's an immediate outcome, but then how does that feed into a long-term result? To switch gears for just a bit, and when we're talking about these results, the language that we use in terms of these results is really important. We're talking about outcomes that are the broad statements of what we think is going to change. And then there are the indicators, and the indicators are, as you see on this slide, a specific piece of information that allows you to measure all or part of the outcome. So it's where we add what we're going to measure. So at the family level, where we said children weren't ready to learn, we might count at the family level the number of children that are now ready to learn or ready for school. And at the community level, we might say the number of services or opportunities that are available. So it includes numbers of things that we're going to then measure against. Oftentimes you need several indicators really to talk about a single outcome because there's more than one approach, there's more than one piece that has to be accomplished in order to achieve that large outcome. A couple characteristics of indicators. It's well defined and it's clear that this indicator is going to measure or demonstrate the big change that we hope for, that it's meaningful, that it's really related to the outcome, that it's not something from out in left field, that it's actionable, that it's really something that can be changed. If it isn't something you can change, then you shouldn't be trying to measure it. It doesn't make sense to do that. So you want to ask yourself all these questions. Can you actually do something about it? And then is it measurable, and is it clear what data we need to collect in order to respond? In the CSBG Annual Report, there are revised Community NPIs, CNPIs, that are really designed to track this kind of community work. It's Module 3, and there are two kinds of indicators, counts of change and rates of change. And this is just a quick screenshot of that module. You'll be seeing more about it. And you'll see that there's a place for other in both the counts of change and the rates of change for you to be able to identify. I saw a question come in about are indicators only the related to long-term outcomes, and no, they're not. You want indicators all along the way so you can measure your progress. As I said back on this slide here, that it may take a long time to get to that long-term goal, but it's important for you to say, what can we do this year, what can we do in the next 6 months, and that you would have indicators that would identify your progress towards that short-term goal. So then the next question is, what will you do? What will the agency do? And part of that then really is, as it says on this slide, this is the decision point. What resources are you going to put into this initiative? And oh boy, it's like everything else. There's so many demands on the resources of an agency, staff, facilities, funds, partners. You know, it's just a demand for all of that. And so I have, as the agency, we have an overall agency strategic plan and a local theory of change, hopefully, that says this is what we're going to do. And so we need to make sure that we understand how much is going to be, again, is going to be devoted to this community level project. This needs to be done up front. You need to really think through what resources and how much time is going to be required, and do you need additional staffing to support this, or volunteers, or what exactly do you expect to do? This is the what do you want to do part that comes after the what do you want to accomplish part. And really in the annual report, there is a list of community strategies. So it will help you to think about the kinds of things that you might do. And there are probably lots of things that aren't on that list, and we'll have to find ways for you to provide feedback that says, oh, we're doing these other kinds of things. And remember, it's important that it's not just you alone, that you're going to identify who else is involved in the issue exactly. You know, who else do you see that might be, who's with you? Are there other agencies that are connected to this specific need? So in Harriet's example, where they're looking at youth, you're of course going to engage the school, and there may be other providers of services that are directed to your target population that you would want to also engage. We also sent out ahead of time this activity that we call the partnership map activity, and it's a way for you to start to think about who your partners might be, and you really need to consider that before you start to think about the strategies. And if we were in person, I would ask you, why would you want to make sure you know who's with you before you start to think about the strategies? Okay, we're going to replicate a certain project, but maybe we don't have the same partners that other collaborative had, and so we might need to adjust our strategies based on the strengths, the expertise, the resources, the skills, the time commitment, the involvement, the level of involvement of all our partners. Those would all be things that would help us to identify what would go into the selection of strategies. You may have seen this little graphic before. Often our efforts in a community, the efforts of the nonprofit or the service community, the human service providers, looks like the before picture, everybody doing their own thing. And we propose that it's more effective if all of those efforts are aligned in a way to focus on the problem with the big arrow rather than all those little arrows. It's pretty clear that that's important. But what does the agency need to do to make this happen? These are some things that we think that the agency is doing already and needs to be able to articulate how they're doing these things as they begin to talk about a focus on community work. So including others that to make sure this program is the right program. Is it the right program, the right initiative, at the right time? And the only way you'll really be able to verify that is by looking at what's happening in the community and using your partners. And then to figure out how each piece is part of a larger strategy. So in that graphic earlier where all those little arrows are going into the big arrow, it's that big arrow that's going to produce the long-term change. But those little arrows are going to each achieve little outcomes that are part of a larger strategy. I think sometimes we don't consider sustainability at the beginning of a project. We might have resources for a year or 2 years, and we don't start to think about sustainability until the resources are almost done. And this is one of the pieces that's important for the work of the agency, to really consider sustainability at the beginning of the project. I can't make it move. There we go. There are a number of models for working together. You've heard the term collective impact, and there'll be some folks working with us in this learning community going forward that will talk more about collective impact. But they have a term that they call mutually reinforcing activities. And that's really what that graphic, that earlier graphic is about, is those activities that come together that reinforce each other. Each of them reinforces the other. The Annie Casey Foundation has a very similar concept that's called aligned contributions, and you'll hear more about that from some subject matter experts as we go through the process. But you can see just by the term aligned contributions that the partners all have a part to play in a strategically developed plan. And then Oakley and Krug really have very similar statement called synergy through planned alignment. And I like that that additional concept of planned alignment, that it just isn't, oh, we happen to meet in the grocery store and are talking about our two programs, myself and another human service provider, and we say, oh, we're doing something that's aligned. Well, no, we're talking about planned alignment that really drives the initiative as we go forward. This is an example that we've shared at some of the conferences. This is one of the agencies in the network, and they are part of a community collaborative that's designed to get their a specific social impact. That third grade students are proficient in math and reading. And all of these activities are aligned. They're strategically designed to come together to be mutually reinforcing to achieve that goal. And this is a pretty complicated graphic, so probably can't see it all that well on the screen. But some of the pieces of it, home visiting, so that the home visiting efforts of many of the different partners are aligned, so that there's an understanding that if folks need a certain service, they might also get other referrals for other services. There be developmental screenings and follow-up procedures, that there's a subcommittee on intervention, that there's advocacy and rulemaking as part of the process, and that there is a focus on adult capacities, not just children's experiences, so that while moving the children towards a specific third grade goal, they've identified that adult capacities have to be part of the process. Do we want to take a look at some of the, before we look at this example, I'm going to take a look at some of the chats that have been added. Courtney, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to look at some of them.
Yeah, we do have one that hasn't been addressed. So someone sent in that there is a clear need for more affordable housing in our region. Would you consider the development of more affordable housing to be a community level change? And how about the establishment of a land trust?
So again, my question is always the same. My first question is always, how did you establish that need? You say there's a need for affordable housing, so I would ask to see, for you to tell me more about that need. Is there a need in a certain community? Is there a need for a certain kind of housing stock? And then who else is involved? Who might be involved in the process? Brainstorm with those other folks to think of what's the best outcome, both the long-term outcome and then what short-term outcomes can we achieve. So the development of more housing absolutely would be something that would be a long-term outcome. It might even be an intermediate outcome depending upon what resources you have readily available. That comes to the strategies. How are you going to do this? And is there a way to, through the development of a land trust or through other resource pools, to make this happen? And then to identify along the way what are the steps that could be included as outcomes. So this is actually one of the most common community level outcomes that have been submitted to the annual reporting system under the old IS system. The development of housing, it's a huge issue across the country, lack of affordable housing. So how you describe it, how you identify the need, how you identify the neighborhood in which the new housing is needed, and then if that's the right strategy. So that's a good example, very good example. Hopefully I was able to talk through those trying to say over and over again the same kinds of steps to take, identify the need, figure out who your partners are, figure out what can change, what are the outcomes, and then figure out what you're going to do about it and how you're going to measure it. Any others, Courtney?
Nope, that's all I saw for now.
Okay, all right. So this is an example that came from the learning community last year. This is a Greater Lawrence Community Action Council. I'll say that some of the pieces of this case study, we're still working with them. It may sound like this is a kind of a fully fleshed out project, but we're kind of making it look that way. We're adding, we've added some information in, but we're going to walk you through it just as a way to do what we did with the last two examples from the group here today, to ask those same questions. So what was the need? And where did we find the need? Where did the need come from? So here's some ideas about the way that you identify a need. I mean, it isn't always a statistical need that you found in your community action assessment process. This was something that came from the pages of the local newspaper. Lawrence garage fire spreads into 3 nearby buildings. Massive fire displaced 50. Dozens of residents displaced, and so on. This was over a short period of time, and the fire department in this low-income community came to the local agency and said, you know, we're seeing that in this neighborhood, as compared to our statistics comparing with our peer fire departments, that in our case, we have families that are displaced, left with nothing. They're turning to all these organizations that don't have many resources of their own, and so we did this. Sorry, if I can get back one. That we said there were both family level and community level needs here in this situation, that families lost their homes and all of their possessions. That's clearly a need. They have no resources to rebuild their lives. When questioned about how the fire happened, they really demonstrated very little knowledge about fire safety or about any fire prevention equipment that they might have had in their homes. And as I said, fires in the low-income community are more frequent and more severe than in other neighborhoods. The firefighters said that they've done this survey, and there's a low percent of low-income homes who have fire insurance, while in other communities there are higher percents. Well, you might say, duh, that's a no-brainer. Of course, the low-income communities can't afford fire insurance. But if that's a key factor in the need, then we need to think about that, and we need to consider, well, what could happen? What could change? If in other communities, families that have fire insurance are able to recover, what could change for the low-income residents? So that's just a statement of need there. And then the community really lacks fire safety resources. This low-income community doesn't have much data. Some of the data behind the need said that the fires were preventable. The first responders said simple fire safety practices could have reduced the severity of the fires, and in some cases may have stopped the fire from happening. You might have had a kitchen fire instead of a whole house fire. None of the families in the low-income community in this particular period of time had smoke detectors. And they really, the first responders really felt that that was a factor. They didn't have renter's insurance, and in addition to the low-income population being identified, they further drilled down to find out who the need was, what population had the need, and they found out the families who were most devastated had limited English language proficiency. So there was an additional barrier for those families. So what do we know about fire prevention? So then this is the next step in trying to figure out what can we do? The first thing is to try to figure out what do we know about this issue. We know that there's a lack of resources to safeguard the home, a lack of understanding, and a lack of skills. And that if there were available fire prevention resources, that it could be helpful. So it turns out that could be something we might affect. And knowledge about fire prevention, we could affect that. That could be a possible positive contributing factor. And maybe we can help figure something out about fire insurance. We don't know yet, but that's part of what we might think about. Some individual outcomes. Individuals are knowledgeable about fire safety. They have smoke detectors. They have fire extinguishers. And maybe they've secured rental insurance. But what changes at the community level? How does this get to be a community level project? And it is because we're talking about the number of home fires or the rate of fires. We're talking about the severity of home fires in general in the community, taken together as a percent of change, not a count of change necessarily, but a percent of change. And then what about the percent of homes in the community that have smoke detectors? So we could count the individual people who got them, but how does that impact on the overall percent of the families in the community that have that fire prevention resource? Are they covered by insurance? And then something that we don't often think about, but this group did, could there be a change of policy that would encourage landlords to help their renters get renter's insurance? Could it be part of occupancy permit codes or lease requirements? Could there be a policy that could help those low-income people get fire insurance, if that's a big factor? So what can we do? So the group found there were partners. The American Red Cross had some smoke detectors. There were some opportunities to provide fire prevention education, both specifically to the non-English language speaking population, using culturally sensitive approaches. We could explore the availability of fire insurance, and we could advocate for policies. And we could develop MOUs with other organizations to create this ongoing communication plan about this issue. So what are we going to count? What are the indicators of change? Individuals who increase knowledge, have working smoke detectors, have fire insurance, the percent of households with prevention equipment, the number and severity of fires, policies related to the fire insurance. So what I tried to do was match those up with the reports. So these are all community level indicators. This one is other. First one is other, and so we've written in decrease in the number of fires. This is a count of change. And then the number of public safety assets and resources. So the number of resources for fire prevention equipment as part of the public safety. And then percent of households with, these are percents of change, percent of households with prevention equipment or with fire insurance. So this is an example. You can see 3 out of the 4 of them are others. They're write-ins, and that's something that we need to be able to understand. How do we use language to help three elements that we started with. This is where we're identifying the need, figuring out what we're going to do, and then figuring out what our strategies are with those outside our network. Okay, I think that is that's our summary slide that is really talking about the elements of community level work that we want to work on. So as part of our affinity group calls, we're going to try to get some interest from the field of the couple projects maybe that were mentioned today, and other ideas that you have to flesh them out so they might look a little bit like this sample that we just walked through with the Greater Lawrence Community Fire Prevention Project. So I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney, if I can do that. And you take the presenter role back, or do I have to do something? There you are. Okay.
Yep, hello.
Thank you.
Yep, I have it back, so I'm good.
Great.
All right. Well, looks like from our chat, we'll kind of open it up for any questions. I don't see anything that's come in that we still need to address from previous chats. But if you have questions, please type them in the chat box now, and we'll address them. So anything that you're thinking about with community level work, or questions like other people have asked, whether something kind of counts as community level work, or even something that you would like to talk about in future affinity groups, those things would be helpful for us to know as well. So as you might be typing in your questions, I won't wait here in dead awkward silence. So I'll go ahead and go through some of our announcements. Just saw a quick question on the recording and whether it'll be posted to the Moodle site, and it will. And so I'll go through a little bit about our Moodle site and what'll be on that here in just a little bit. But one thing that Barbara referenced throughout the webinar is this white paper that we have on thinking about community level work. So Barbara drafted this kind of in response to the previous community level learning community group last year, and just kind of bringing together a lot of the aspects of what was talked about in those three elements of community level work, as well as the example. So all of that is laid out there. So if you'd like more information on what was talked about today, a good place to go is this new publication. So you can find the publication on the website. It's under Tools and Resources and in our Toolkit and Publication Library. And there should be a section that talks about the Anti-Poverty Practice Series. Another place where it is housed is on our Moodle site. And so we will talk about that here in a moment. But another resource that has a lot of really great resources, as well as blog posts and such, related to this topic, as well as other topics within our learning community, is our learning community blog. So that's at lcrcweb.com, and you can subscribe to that so you'll get regular updates on what has been posted. And so I encourage you to go check that out as you engage in the learning community and follow the blog. Another great resource is the CSBG TNTA Resource Center. This one's been around for a while, so you might have heard of it before. But there's a lot of different aspects to it. Of course, the resource bank is the most widely used piece of it. There's hundreds of resources in there, anywhere from webinars, toolkits, training guides, external resources, as well as internal community action resources, those from the field as well as those from national partners. So definitely check this out. You can do keyword searches to find what you're looking for. And if you have any issues with it, feel free to let us know and we can help you troubleshoot. Another announcement, of course, is our Webinar Wednesday. So you all are actually participating in our kind of our first Webinar Wednesday with the Open Learning Community Groups and all of the Learning Community Group topics that will be presented. So at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, you can kind of just block out your calendar at that time if you're able. And basically every Wednesday for the rest of the year, there'll be a webinar presentation on an anti-poverty practice topic. So anything related to our different learning community groups. There's about 8 different learning community group topics that'll kind of be rotated throughout the year. So even if you're not a part of the learning community group that it's related to, you can still participate in these Webinar Wednesdays. They are open to the entire network for people to learn and connect together. So this is what I've been referring to as our Moodle site. It's actually called the Community Action Academy. And it's a way for people to really kind of stay connected within the learning community and continue the learning in between the online engagements such as today. So we have a particular course or group within there called the Results at the Community Level. And this is a free online learning hub for the Community Action Network. And so it's not necessarily open to outside networks. We're providing this specifically for the Community Action Network. So any of those over 1,000 agencies in our network, state associations, state CSBG offices, national partners can register for an account. And it is free. The account creation takes just a few minutes. You go to moodle.communityactionpartnership.com to create your account. Once your account is confirmed through email, you may log in. And under the course categories box, which will be at the right-hand side of your screen, you can go in there and click on Learning Communities. Then you go to the Open Learning Community Groups, and you'll find the results at the community level. So here is where you can engage in online discussion. You can access various resources as well as share own resources from different agencies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the direct link in the chat now. And if you click on this link, you will be able to access the, let me title it so that you know what it is. So you can actually click on this direct link, and if you already have a Community Action Academy account, all you have to do is click this, log in, and it'll take you directly to the course. If you don't, it'll prompt you to create an account, and then you can use this direct link once you have an account. So that'll take you directly to this. The slides from today, as well as some of the different prep materials, like the partner mapping activity, the white paper is in there, as well as the upcoming webinar opportunities, contact information, and a few other resources around community level work. So I encourage you to check that out. Start a discussion if you'd like. If you have questions about the community level work that you're working on, there's a discussion forum in there, so you can kind of pose questions to your peers as well as the subject matter experts and our LCRC team. So that's a good online resource for you all to access. Then our meeting schedule coming up, so we've crossed today off the list, and our next meeting will be February 28th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And with this one, we'll be focusing on gathering community data. And so as your communities or as your agencies are doing community needs assessments, oftentimes you're looking at different sources for quantitative data or even qualitative data. And so this will go through a couple of different online tools such as Community Commons and County Health Rankings and Roadmaps to help you think about how to collect the community level data that you might need to look at to determine what the need is and how to move forward on it, and just know about those tools that are out there and what they can do for you. So I encourage you to join that, whether you're a part of the core learning community group or not. It's open to the network. Then the affinity groups, Barbara mentioned these throughout the webinar. So what we're going to do with these are kind of opportunities for you to self-select into a more closer discussion with your peers as well as the subject matter experts and myself from the LCRC team. And so we'll be having 2 of those opportunities for engagement in this phase of this learning community. One is on March 15th, one is on April 19th. And the times aren't up here, but we have determined that we'll do those at 3 p.m. or 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time is when our affinity groups will take place. And so on those 2 dates, if you're interested in talking more about your community level work, please join us and we'll be glad to have you and have a discussion. So it'll be good. And then we'll be doing another live webinar event on March 21st as well. All right, and then I think our last announcement, and if you have questions, send those in now because we'll be wrapping up here in just a few moments. But we do have a baseline survey for those of you who are you know, in the results of the community level learning community group and following the whole series. We would like for you to engage in this baseline survey so that we can kind of see, you know, gauge the learning and make improvements as we go. So it's a 6-question survey. We've made it brief and easy to fill out because we know your time is limited. And so this is the URL for the baseline survey. I'll post this in the Moodle course as well for people to access there. But you can also just type this into your web browser to be able to take this survey. So we'd appreciate you doing that. If you could do that within the next week, that would be ideal. All right, and then here's our contact info. Here's the Community Action Partnership on our Learning Community Resource Center team. Feel free to contact any one of us with questions or comments. We always welcome the opportunity to connect with you. And I'm not seeing any other questions. Barbara, did you have anything else before we conclude?
Oh, I just turned my mic off instead of on. No, I don't think so. If people have any questions, one of the things once they download the PowerPoint, they'll see that I did also identify in the notes on one of the slides some of the strategies for that Greater Lawrence fire prevention activity. So it's on one of the slides to look at, because that's part of the reporting for the community level, is both strategies and the indicators. So I didn't mention that part as we went through it, but it's on the PowerPoint, so as people look at it, they'll see it.
Yeah, and also if you're wanting more information on that example, we have included kind of like the full version of that example within the Moodle site as well, so you can access that when you go into Moodle.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara, and thank everyone for joining us today. We hope you have a great day. Thank you.